Hello, everybody. I am really excited about this. All three colleges have been fantastic to work with. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think you will find it super inspiring to hear what it is they've done and some of the obstacles that they've overcome. And I think that I'd echo what Bob said, really, that their honesty throughout the process is what makes these projects come alive, because they've been so open about what's worked and what hasn't worked, which of course is helpful for everybody else as well. So yes, so I'm going to hand over to Claire Wilton in a moment from York ACL, and she's going to be talking about their teaching triangle and what they learned and how the project's developed over time.
So our project was about enhancing two-way feedback between tutors and learners. And we are at York Learning, we're a part of City of York Council. So we're an adult and community learning service provider. And coming out of the pandemic, where we were very much going on to online learning, we wanted to see if we could come out of that and mix online and face-to-face learning. Using maybe some of the techniques we'd started to use, but adapting it for more of a hybrid setting. That was what we started with. It wasn't necessarily where we ended up. So I'll tell you a little bit about the approach we used. It was a teaching triangle, and we've used those before in York, but never in a kind of formal project like this one. And there were three of us in the triangle. Obviously, hence the triangle. So I'm an English tutor and largely teach functional skills in group settings. We also had Alison, who I'm really hope is going to turn up at some point, because hearing directly from her is absolutely the best thing that we can do this morning. Alison works with our 16 to 19 provision with young people who have kind of slipped out of the school system and needs a different kind of education. And then our third member of our triangle is Sharon, who can't be with us today, so I'm reporting on her behalf too. And she works with very small groups of flexible learners and apprentices, again teaching functional skills. So all coming from slightly different areas, 2 English tutors and 1 tutor teaching employability. And the triangle works by us doing our own thing, but then coming together regularly, sharing what we were doing, giving each other feedback, and observing each other in a classroom setting and giving feedback that way. So we found it a very powerful approach. I'm going to skip past Alison in the hope that she might turn up a bit later and I can bring her in. So I'll just skip through her slides. And I will come to what I did. Now, I started doing something on feedback on writing and enabling learners to do reflection on writing and feedback to me and me feeding back to them. But after about 3 months, I received a piece of feedback from a learner about the work we were doing on complex sentences, which made me entirely switch focus. And luckily, with Andy's view that you can, nothing is wrong in action research and it's fine to switch focus. And with the support of Helen as our mentor, I completely switched focus. And I started looking at teaching sentence writing in a very different way to how I'd done it before. Because the feedback I'd had from that one particular learner was, this is a nightmare. So I started to explore sentence writing in a different way. I'm just going to tell you 2 short stories and give you 1 example of work. So short story number 1 is that I produced this visual capture sheet, very much inspired by the session that we had in the December meeting by Chloe and Emily Bryson. So I used this to encourage learners to reflect on how they felt their sentence writing skills were. So I divided it into 6, use of full stops, use of commas, use of linking words, conjunctions, use of capital letters in the right place, and then something about length of sentences. So are they confident that they don't write in fragments or note form? Can they write full sentences? And can they make sure their sentences are controlled and don't go on too long with multiple commas instead of full stops, for example. So this was quite useful to get people to think about how they might be weak in one area but strong in another. And one of my learners is an example on the left of where they've marked little lines on the spokes of the wheel. And then on the right, one of my learners could not get her head around that. And actually, looking back, I'm not surprised. And she marked her little lines around the edge, so more like a clock than a wheel. And that solves the problem of which line am I marking on? Is it the left of the picture or the right of the picture? So she hasn't scored herself very highly on any category. And actually, we're going to look at her writing in a second. But this was my story number one. Try it out with your learners. They might actually come up with a better version, as this learner did. So now next year when I'm going to be using this, it's going to be more of a clock than a wheel. And I just think that works a lot better. So that was story number one. Story number two is something else that didn't particularly work. And this was another idea, because I love the kind of whole of drawing pictures and making everything really kind of participative and creative. So I tried the weather chart, where you've got a kind of spectrum of weather, from a bit like what we did with the Menti this morning. You've got a bright sunshine one end, everything's lovely. I feel very, very confident about what I'm doing. Right through to the other end, it's a bit of a thunderstorm. And I asked my learners to reflect on how they felt about writing sentences and to mark it on the weather charts. And you can just about see, I hope, from the picture that we've got a little initial C underneath the darker cloud. And then we've got a little tick that someone's put underneath the paler cloud right in the middle. And then I have a learner with ADHD and possibly autism as well, a young man in his mid-20s. And I knew he wasn't really listening. He kind of zoned out when I explained it. And even though I explained it again to him, he really struggled with the idea of the metaphor of weather. No, actually, metaphor of weather wasn't the problem. It was relating that to his writing sentences. It was just one step too far in the kind of whole metaphorical representation of how he felt. So his are the comments in writing. So he's talked about the sun being about positivity and inspiring and happiness. And then he's written about thunderstorms being about negativity and depressing views. So he's got that metaphor, but he hasn't been able to take the next step and relate it to sentence writing. So that was really useful for me to realize that, you know, some of this is not going to work for everybody. And it's good to have a range of techniques to encourage learners to reflect on their own strengths and weaknesses.
I'll just add there, Claire, what will also be even more useful to you now at this particular point is the news that Alison is with us.
Yay! Hi, Alison.
Thank you. Hello. Sorry.
Well,
Claire.
Brilliant.
I got lost.
I thought you might have done.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Alison. Welcome.
Hello.
I think I'll just finish off on my section, Alison, and then I'll reverse to your slides, if that's all right.
Oh, that's lovely. Yes, thank you.
So the little evidence of writing that I just want to finish with in my section. This is the learner who revamped the wheel into a clock. She's not at all confident with her English. She has undiagnosed but very likely learning disabilities of her own, and she does struggle particularly with full stops. And this is before we did the project, and I've just circled a few things on here. She's used the word maybe at the beginning of a sentence 3 times. She's got some sentence fragments going on in here. She's got missing where I've put the little yellow stars. She's got missing words or missing punctuation. You can see right in the middle with the red circle, she's got a comma and then a capital letter. So she's not entirely sure there about her punctuation. And I can only really find one conjunction, which is the word and in the top line. So that was some of the things that she was struggling with in her writing. But for her, I focused on conjunctions, really. We stopped talking about complex and compound and simple, just didn't talk about that at all. We focused on putting conjunctions in to link your words together. And just to show you what she came up with after a few weeks of looking at that. So you can already see the words in green, loads more conjunctions that she's using. And she's even got because and although towards the end. And there are still a few missing things towards the end of that paragraph, but it's nowhere near as full as errors as her first one. And for me, the real success was that looking at conjunctions seemed to have a really positive impact on where she put her full stops. It almost seemed to kind of bring the patterns together in her mind. So we didn't just have improvements on the conjunctions she was using, but I saw improvements in the way she was using full stops as well. So I was absolutely delighted to see that. And that is the end of my section. So I'm going to zoom back through the slides and ask Alison to talk about hers. Alison, just let me know when you want me to flick to the next slide.
Will do, thank you.
Off you go, Alison.
Yeah, so if we can start from the first one, Claire, please.
Yeah, can you see it on the screen?
No, it's still on yours at the moment.
Helen, can you see the teaching triangle with Alison's name?
That's
Yes,
it.
I can.
That's better now. That's it.
Okay.
That's it. Yep, it's coming up now. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, I need to go back to the first one.
Do you want me to show the pictures?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Oh, that's it. That's the right one. Thank you, Claire. Yeah. So my part of this was I was in a teaching triangle with Claire and Sharon, two of my colleagues from York Learning. We all work in different areas. I work on the foundation learning part of the programme, which I work with some of the most vulnerable young people in the city. A lot of them have been disengaged from school before coming to us, have low self-esteem and confidence levels. And what I wanted to do as part of the work from the triangle that I've been working on was try and look at ways of doing more creative feedback with them. Because when I was doing reviews, I'd sort of say, you know, you're doing well, this is good and all this. But I think because they'd never really believed in themselves, they were struggling to grasp that the work, they didn't see themselves as actually making an improvement. And I thought, what can we do to try and bring that confidence back in and let them see that they are actually progressing whilst they're on the programme. So what we did, we took part in some community programmes, projects that were going on in the city. And what I did, I took a bit of a gamble. I thought I'll let them sort of critique each other and give feedback to each other. And I thought, I don't know how it's going to go, whether it will go well or whether it will be, they'll be too critical or not able to you know, give feedback to each other. But it worked really well, and the difference it's made in the learners has been absolutely fantastic. Just taking photographs of them actually working together and helping each other. And I've also done a little bit of recording as well of the sessions, which I've never done before. Just so they can actually hear each other and see how they've actually joined together. And these two young ladies both came to us last year with really low levels of confidence, but to see them actually working together and having a laugh about things that maybe didn't go quite right, or they were trying to make a box, I think, there, and it was totally the wrong size. And Grace was trying to show Alicia just what to do, but the way they actually interacted together was brilliant. And I think to actually see when they saw themselves on the photos, it was really good. So this was the community arts project that York Learning did, and it was making birds from recycled materials.
Ali,
So
sorry to interrupt that, Ali. You've got a couple of minutes left and then we need to allow time for questions.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right?
We'll move on to the... I do talk a lot, just tell me.
No, there's just so much to share.
Then,
it's
please,
brilliant.
Claire. I know, it's been so good. Could I have the next slide, please, Claire?
Yeah, I've moved it onto the one with the flower pot. Did you want that one?
Yes,
Or
please.
did you want to talk about the RAG rating?
Yeah, we'll talk about the RAG rating.
Okay, I'll move on to that one.
Thank you.
It's on my screen, Ali, so you just go for it.
Looks like Ali's frozen.
Yeah, it does.
Claire, do you want to just are you all right to quickly explain it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Ali and her team used a RAG rating to help the learners rate themselves on their soft skills, and they found they were doing this, getting learners to do it by themselves on through Google Classroom, but they found actually that they got really positive feedback from the learners when they did it sitting next to them and they were doing it together. And this was one of those occasions where doing everything online was not the best way of doing it. And one of the learners said to me when I went to observe, she said, I really like it when I'm sitting next to Ali, because then if she gives me some negative feedback, I can argue straight away with her and we can discuss it. And when she gives me positive feedback, I hear it from her, so I believe it a lot more. So this was just one of those times in our project when we realized that there was nothing wrong with sticking with face-to-face teaching and learning, and that for some people in some situations it's far better, and it's not a backward step, it's learning to work with all the resources that we have. And
I think it's a good indication of the learners that you have. We established right from the beginning, or rather you did, that's what your specific cohort needed. And that's fantastic, because you're able to support them as best as possible. Lynn has just typed into chat as we're going, because we are running slightly over already, just to put any questions that you have in chat, so that in a second when we run to questions, we can answer them as quickly and efficiently as possible. Right, Claire, I'm going to hand over to you for the last minute or so. No pressure.
Okay. So just the last part of the triangle was, I'll just very quickly go through this, was Sharon's work, and she worked on an activity learning log and developing that for use with two-way information flow with her learners, and very much used it as a way of, as you can see here, we've got the tutor, the learner saying what they've done and reflecting on it. And then in purple, you've got the Sharon's feedback. And she found that this worked really well at keeping a discussion going with her apprentices and her flexi learners that she wasn't necessarily seeing on quite such a regular basis, or who were doing work out of their organised sessions, more work at home. She also said that she found it really useful to have a visual set of evidence if, for example, learners had missed quite a lot of sessions. And there was one example where an employer was questioning why the learner hadn't made as much progress as they were expecting. And Sharon could use these as something that was very visual to say, well, look, you missed that session, you missed that session, you missed that session. So if you're not getting ahead as fast as you're expecting, then it probably is to do with your attendance. So she found that a really useful record. And another of the learners who used this said that they liked it better than the previous one that they'd used because, where's my slide? Yeah, the quote is at the bottom. They found it more chattable. So I think the idea of that two-way conversation really came through in that document, where the previous version that Sharon had used, it wasn't really working like that. So she found it very positive to experiment with that way of giving and receiving feedback with learners. And just to finish off, we thought about professionally how this experience had worked for us, and everybody felt really positive about it. And it took time, it very much did take time, and a lot of our colleagues are reluctant to get involved in teaching triangles because of the perceived time it will take away from everything else that everyone has to do. But we all felt that it was really worth it, and we'd gained so many benefits from sharing with each other, working with different people across the organisation than we wouldn't normally have worked with, and actually being able to justify the time to research things that we've maybe been wanting to look at for quite a while.
And what's fab as well, Claire, there is the fact that you're formally going to be sharing your findings, aren't you, in a week or two, is that right? Yeah,
yes, in 2 weeks' time, we've got a training event where we're going to be sharing our teaching triangle results, and hopefully encouraging more of our colleagues to give it a go and find their own topics that they can research and share with other tutors.
I love that. And I think that you are such a fab example of how you've made it work. And yeah, people have something tangible to actually measure it against, don't they? So rather than it being an abstract thing, this is what we did, and not knowing how much time it will take and how it works, you can evidence it. So well done, both of you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Ali, as well. Really appreciate it. We had one question just very briefly in chat, which was, well, how much they like your resources, and also whether they're in your appendices, which they are. So yes, thank you very much, both of you.
I'll just add there, Helen, when people have a chance to access all the project reports, they'll find some interesting observations about the digital tools that you originally planned to explore as part of the research project, Claire, didn't you? So you've looked at some really great ways of it. What you did was to begin to value the opportunity you have for face-to-face feedback, and you moved away from some of the use of the online tools for feedback that you'd heard other colleges. So that's a very interesting journey that you made. And thanks very much for sharing those excellent resources with us.
Yeah, thank you both.
Helen.
Right, okay, I would like to hand over to Jo Stiles and her team from South Essex College, and they are going to be, as Bob talked about earlier, going to be talking about neurodiverse, that was a sentence, wasn't it? Neurodiverse learners and what they have learned. And what's lovely about this project is the fact that they are building on last year's action research project. So they had a starting point, and they've gone in a slightly different avenue this time. So Jo, I'm going to hand over to you and your colleagues. Are you all right with the PowerPoint, Jo?
Thank you, Helen. I'm just going to try and share now. So
okay.
I shall. Hello, everybody. I'm giving a presentation alongside my colleagues from South Essex College, and our project for OTLA 8 this year was titled Thinking Aloud. So just to give a bit of background, South Essex College is a large general further education college. We have 5 campuses. We're located in the estuary, Essex, running from close to London right the way down to Southend-on-Sea. And this project was focused really on our 16 to 18 GCSE students, and most of our students who are resitting do tend to undertake the GCSE in either their English or their maths. So the project Rationale, as Helen made reference to, was to build on what we'd done last year, where we looked at English vocabulary in maths. And one of the teams that was involved in the project last year undertook a lot of research into reciprocal reading, and they'd looked at different strategies around questioning, clarifying, summarising and predicting, which was beneficial for our maths learners when grasping the problem-solving aspects of the vocabulary in maths questions. And it also highlighted to us how we could take that a little bit further, and we really wanted to look at our support for our SEND learners in the classroom, because we're a very large college. We have close to 1,200 learners that sit GCSE English with us, over 1,500 that sit maths. And we really have got increased volumes of students coming through with neurodiversity, and really wanted to look at how we could create a resource that was going to be inclusive for everybody, where we were looking at how can we carry out further research, further understanding of what support our learners need, and create something that will be relevant for everybody. So we did a lot of work around phonological, visual, the memory difficulties that a lot of our students experience. And what we wanted to do is give consideration to the difference in ability in the classroom. So our learners might be coming to us with a grade 2 in GCSE versus a learner with a grade 3, and really unpick what that means in terms of reading age and the ability difference, and starting to think, well, what could we do that would work for all of our learners, but also build our knowledge around neurodiversity, so that we're really considering that. So all of these were the kind of the key aims that are listed here. And as I said, it really was starting to focus very much on the starting point of the reciprocal reading that had come out of the previous project. So my colleagues, Dave and Danny, are going to talk about the reciprocal reading before we go on to talk about what we did this year, because as I said, that was the building blocks for what we really were looking at.
The actual background to OTLA 7 was a couple of years ago. I was teaching maths to relatively able learners and realised that they couldn't take apart the more complex or more complicated questions. The math skills were okay. When I started talking them through the maths questions, they could answer the questions being posed when I was breaking it down. So, but they couldn't read the question themselves and realise which pieces of maths to use to actually answer it. So I kind of parked that thought, reflected, and the only strategy open to me at that time was repetition and further exposure to problems, which didn't really satisfy what I was looking for. So only the opportunity to do some action research under OTLA 7 appeared. I felt quite privileged to be able to look at some methods for getting the learners to take the part of the question, look at what the question was asking, find the bit of maths that they for them to use, which they're capable of using, and apply it to the questioning being answered, which has led to the development of the resources, which Joe's just going to pop up now. The first animatic, thanks Joe, you can animate them both in. That little picture shows what we developed using Microsoft Forms. There was a question, fairly long question, worded question. The maths was relatively easy. So what we did, we asked them to look at the individual parts of the question, and we tied it, we shoehorned it into reciprocal teaching with the really strong assistance from my colleague Danny. So thank you, Joe, you can keep going. Stage one, keep going, Joe, keep going. One more. The first part was predict the questions. So what sort of maths question is being used, and what sort of math skills do they need to use to answer that question. Then we went slightly out of sync with reciprocal teaching. We asked the learners to dig into the question. One more, Joe, thank you. For each of the questions, identify the key points from each line within the question. We then, thank you, Joe, extended the original form we were using for them to clarify the type of question that is being used and then summarize. So they'd look at the question, what math skills do we need to use? What were the key points for the question? And do they need a clarification? Probably not. And explain the nature. So they're actually looking at what sort of answers required. Now, anecdotal evidence, when we use this for the first or second time, they need a little bit of scaffolding support for answering what the key points were. But after about 3 or 4 times, they were quite adept at doing it. And say anecdotally, did get some grade 4s from previous learners who were grade 2 and grade 3. So I think it was actually quite successful. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Dave. So we really disseminated the reciprocal reading at the start of the project. We used that as the launch for what we wanted to explore, but a key part of our project right from the start was to work with our academic learning mentors. So our project team was made up of both our GCSE maths teachers, GCSE English teachers, and also Anne-Marie, who's one of our academic learning mentors. And she was really pivotal to the project because it was really about our team starting to build stronger understanding of neurodiversity when starting to consider a resource. So Anne-Marie is going to talk through what she was doing as part of the project.
Hi, so as Joe said, I work in the Additional Learning Support Department. So I was asked to represent our department in this project. I really welcomed this opportunity to work alongside experts in the academic teaching teams in collaboration with ourselves, so to promote equality of opportunity and neurodiversity for all of our learners. At this college, we've got a growing number of learners receiving input from additional learning support across the campus. I think this year currently we've got 758 wider SEN learners That's not including EHCP and high need learners. So there's a growing culture of inclusivity in the learning environment for our ALS learners. So that's what, as Jo said, myself and the academic tutors worked together on this project to generate a comprehensive resource to enhance reciprocal reading across the board, regardless of any neurodiversities. So as a starting point, I identified potential problems surrounding our learners regarding reading comprehension, essentially in GCSE maths and English. To explore issues which learners may have experienced, I did some primary research by involving various focus groups of our student learner coaches, who are kind of LSA, TA people that work here, and they support our ALS learners at ground level. So during our focus group sessions, I obtained vast feedback about any difficulties that our students encounter in the classroom with reading and prediction, and also some potential solutions to overcome them. So after gathering all this information, I presented it, as you can see, by setting up a flowchart, which displayed my findings visually. So although neurodiversity encompasses an expansive range of diagnosed learning and medical conditions, for the purpose of this task, I selected 3 neurodiverse conditions commonly represented and supported here at the college. And as you can see, I've picked ADHD, the autism spectrum and dyslexia. So the chart shows reading comprehension difficulties and solutions that we discussed in our focus sections, and it was soon evident that many of the difficulties and solutions are overlapping regardless of neurodiversity. So then I shared this with the tutors who were part of our OTLA project, and together we identified common problems with reading comprehension, and these included decoding the question, what it's asking for, understanding language features like Claire said, metaphors, similes, oxymorons, etc., interpreting meaning, reading between the lines, identifying inferences, as well as working on keeping students engaged and on tasks when they seem complex or lengthy. So this led to looking at solutions to aid reading comprehension by producing the resource collaboratively. And the resource was aimed at all learners, not just using a bespoke resource for ALS learners, which is often the case, but a resource which could work with all learners despite neurodiversity in maths and English lessons. And it was really refreshing, I will say, to work as part of a wider team to build up a generic resource for all learners to improve their reading comprehension. So during our meetings, we looked at problems, discussed solutions, and this culminated in our resource, which on the next slide, Shima will discuss.
Shima, before you begin, so sorry to jump in. You've got about 3 or 4 minutes to allow us time for questions.
Perfect, got it. Yeah,
lovely. By the end, I mean, with Jo as well.
Lovely, perfect. So this resource, I was looking closely at learner abilities, and what I saw was a gap in their understanding. They weren't able to make the link needed between reading a source or observing an image, then moving on to the writing segments and writing about what is being inferred. And so my research was our research was to focus on increasing comprehension levels and to increase learner ability to infer information and to be able to predict an outcome in line with the awarding body specification. And so we focused on comprehension, which will ultimately mean that it will close the gap with learner knowledge where there is a lack of ability to join ideas and concepts together. And then to form an effective outcome for the question that's being posed. So as you can see here in the resource, you've got learners are presented with an image, which they look at very closely, and they either work independently or with their peers to articulate a response. And in addition to this, they'll be able to successfully create a detailed plan capturing key information needed. As you can see here, I have copied and pasted what this particular learner kind of went on to continue the story. This learner is on the higher EHCPs, on kind of high need under the NHS care, and he was able, if you could move on, Jo, to the next slide very quickly, you can see he was able to look at the image very closely. He was able to observe the scenario, and he was able to use the image with the scenario to then continue the story on. He was able to use relevant vocabulary, such as the word contain, the use of ellipses to create effect and structure, which is really important for his GCSE exam. And so he clearly went on to demonstrate he was able to begin writing a really well structured response. Yes. So very quickly, what the outcome was that through enhancing, this was basically the idea of this resource was enhancing learner understanding of inference and prediction, moving on to creating a resource which was suitable for all levels of learners. So you kind of start quite basic and you grow from there. And it just basically removes complexity, because often you find that questions don't need to be put so in a really complex manner. It can be simplified to its simplest form, and students respond really well when it's not really overly complicated. Anne-Marie?
Yeah, so it allows also students with SEN to share their neurodiverse views to enrich the learning perspective of the whole class. So students that are neurodiverse may think outside the box, have a different thinking process, which involves everybody thinking differently. And EHCP learners can work towards their outcomes, which are very difficult to achieve at times. So outcomes such as communication and interaction, they can be measured. And also, just very quickly, we had one learner that Shima was talking about. So he started off in his mock English GCSE as a grade 2 prior to the resource, and after the resource he's now working towards a grade 4.
100%. So obviously this then proves a really positive outcome to teaching and learning, which improves engagement, attendance, and obviously the overall outcome for the entire college. We've had some feedback, not just learners who are on the who do have EHCP or an SEN, but to make this more inclusive with all the learners in all the classrooms. The outcome has been really, really amazing, and the feedback has also been positive.
Thank you. So just to conclude, the team have presented what we've done this year. What we want to do in terms of our next steps is that the multi-sensory approach that have come into presentations have been explored. We really want to reinforce that going forward in all of our teaching and learning, and also adapt the resources that started to be developed this year and last year in terms of thinking and giving more consideration to our multi-sensory learners, which is something that I know Anne-Marie has been exploring with the team, and what we can do where we've talked about making the imagery active and touch and everything else coming in far more into what we do in terms of discussions in the classroom. I think ultimately what we really want to do as a college is the vision that we had was about just making sure that the resource that was created, as Anne-Marie and Shima both said, is something that's rolled out for all of our learners, because we know that they will all benefit from this, where we've done that analysis of what will work best for our high needs learners as well in the classroom. So we want to implement both of the resources that we've explored going forward next year, and continue to work with our academic learning mentors to broaden our understanding further around how we can support neurodiversity in the classroom.
Wonderful, Jo, and everybody else. Thank you so much. That's been fantastic. Now, before we move on, we have some questions in chat, and thank you everyone for putting questions in as people have been talking, so that we can get straight to it. So Claire Wilton's just asked, what do you do in the classroom when the solutions take a lot of time? So for example, arguing, challenging, questioning what the learners read. Jo, are you all right to answer that?
Yeah, I can answer that, and then I might hand over to Shima, obviously who's on the call, where she's been putting that into the classroom. I would say that it's structured into the session, so it's just more about how those discussions unfold, and having a resource and having the imagery and having all of that there is the prompts and the guide, and then it's going to be about how the tutor still manages any challenge or arguing that's going on in the classroom. But Shima, do you want to add to that, because you've utilised this?
Yes, 100%. Thanks, Jo. So students are aware when the lesson starts, when the intent of the lesson is presented to them. They already know, tying into the previous session and to the next session moving forward, what the expectation is. So if I'm delivering GCSE English and I'm looking at, say, for example, question 2, paper 1, which is a language-based question, they already know what to expect. They already know they're expected to write something with the use of language techniques or devices. There aren't any surprises there, and I usually tend to tie in the scenario I give them based on the last lesson and any resources they might have read. So it's really a familiar concept to them. It doesn't throw them off. And so far, thankfully, once I've rolled this out, there's never been any obstacles, as long as it's tied in really effectively with the lesson before, and to be used as a potential connect activity in the start of the new lesson.
Great, thank you ever so much, Shima. Right, one last question. Lynn Baker from Lincoln College has said, what range of scenarios did you use?
Right, so again, I'll be able to answer that. The resources are linked to both of the GCSE papers. So if we take, for example, the one that Joe just presented, that was linked to question 5, or potentially question 2, or even question 3, because in paper 1, creative writing, language, and structure. So they all tie in. We're looking at paper 2, for example, where it's compare and contrast. I've given them 2 images, and I give them a scenario. And then they have to go on to talk about the outcome, and you have to use the forest in the technique. So that's one of their criteria they have to meet. So as the papers build on each other, and it's used as connect activity from the previous lesson, you then use the assessment objective set by the examination body to create this resource. So it's really down to the tutor to have a little play around with the images and the scenarios.
It's quite logical as well, isn't it?
100%.
I think we have also developed this so that we used it in our maths lessons. And I think to bring it back to the starting point of the reciprocal reading, it's about making it accessible. And really, you know, our focus right the way through is about chunking it down and how can you make that block of text more accessible. So we moved away from, we haven't fully moved away, but the concept of the reciprocal reading that Dave shared, we kind of were then looking at how we can bring imagery in, and those discussions happen before you even go near the text. And that, you know, it was really, I think, both of the projects that we did this year and last year they are simple, and they are simple strategies, but really that's what we're talking about, is trying to not overthink what we're giving to our learners and considering all the variation in abilities and creating something that's accessible for all and opens up those positive conversations that then build confidence for tackling the actual content of the work.
Yeah,
that's super, Joe. Just before Helen moves us on, I just want to signpost people to the report, excellent report that you've written, Joe, that explores the links. What you've been trying to do, not this year, but the year before, when I did a bit of work with you, was to look at how to enable maths and English practitioners to work together to share aspects of effective pedagogy. And I think that's one of the other quite distinctive elements of the project that's worth looking at in more detail when you come to read the report, how you've got maths and English teachers to work together and look at approaches that work in both subject specialist areas. So well done, Joe, and thanks for bringing your colleagues with you as well. Great to hear them talk. Helen?
Yeah, it was. Thank you everyone ever so much. That was really, really insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, right. So we are now moving on to Alan from Liverpool College, and his report has been focusing on a weekly read, which, as Bob said, is a non-fiction text that he's been presenting to his learners. And through trial and error, he's seen some brilliant results. So Alan, are you there? Are you all right to share your PowerPoint?
Yeah, hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Alan.
Fantastic stuff so far. I'll just share my screen. Right, okay, yeah, so the concept is of the weekly read. So just to give you a bit of background, the formatting on the slides is interesting. Didn't look like that a second ago.
No, it didn't, but don't worry.
However,
that's fine,
let's just move on.
Just go with it, Alan.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, so yeah, I'm from City of Liverpool College. We're the largest FE college in the region, serving the Liverpool City region. Our cohort are studying on vocational courses. My particular centre, it's primarily visual arts and performing arts students, and a large group studying IT. And they haven't got they're 16 to 18, and they haven't got their GCSE grade 4 yet. And that's what they're working towards. So, so what's the idea? Well, I don't think that the students I work with read enough outside of college. I think they think of English as just a lesson, a couple of times a week, and that's it. That's the only relevance to them. So the idea was that I provide them with one piece of non-fiction reading to do every week outside of class. it isn't a comprehension. Instead, they would reflect and just think about what they've read. It's as simple as that. So marking was kept to a minimum, which is always a good thing. And I wanted to make it as unlike classroom activities as possible. Okay, so what was I looking for? Well, three things really. I wanted to get away from the idea that English was only an academic lesson and a barrier, and try and make the links to real life and the relevance to real life. The second thing was to try and see what impact this would have on students' confidence. And then ultimately, you know, I'm in the business of the students to pass so they can progress. So three different aspects all obviously linked together. Okay, so, well, how did it go then? So in the autumn term, when we started off, some great news. When I talked to the students about the project, they all seemed to understand what the concept was, and they all seemed really interested. So I thought, well, that's a really good start. That's really promising. They kind of embraced the concept, and you know, they wanted to know more. But the bad news was take up was very, very low. The articles were offered on two different formats, either the original web page or like a formatted Word document. And the link was on Teams. So I could see where students had looked at the articles and where they completed the tasks. And in the first few weeks, students did look. They didn't complete the reflections, but they did look at the articles. But then that dropped off. So it was only a few students taking part anyway. And then the interest dwindled. And then it got even worse because I was left with one student who was taking part every week, reading the articles, completing the reflections, and looking forward to it. And it was good for her, but bad for me because she passed her November reset and left. So I was now left with no students taking part at all. So we had to have a rethink, and with Helen, my mentor, we had to think about what to do next.
Alan, just to butt in there,
yeah.
I would be inclined to point out the fact that you did have one learner that engaged really, really well, but of course she passed. So you then lost this learner, and you learned quite a lot from her, didn't you?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to take the credit for her passing, but yeah.
Well, I think you should.
Yeah. Well, that's just a coincidence? I don't think so. No. Yeah, absolutely. So I was able to look at what she'd enjoyed about it and why she'd taken part, and then talk to the other students about why they hadn't and see what the difference was really. So basically, all we did was we just moved it into class. So instead of being a piece of work that took place outside the class, we just moved it in class. So they couldn't not take part then. But I thought, you know, why was it so not unpopular, but why was the take up so low? And I kind of came up with sort of four reasons. Really, in English and maths, there's no real culture of homework, and that's the way they viewed it. So they didn't view it as something extra, something different. It was just a piece of English homework. We don't do homework, so it's as simple as that. One of the students that I did talk to said that when we talked about it in class, he was like, "Oh yeah, I've got to do this. This is good. This will help." But then he'd forget all about it until I saw him for English again next week, and he'd think, "Oh yeah, why didn't I do that?" Which I thought was interesting. I suppose it shows you that English isn't really a priority for our students, you know, which is the problem in the first place. If it was a priority, I suppose they would have passed already, wouldn't it? And then lastly, the idea that students not taking a responsibility for their own learning. So unless there was unless I was there with the, you know, making them do it, they weren't going to do it themselves. So, you know, so what happened next then? Okay, well, so the next thing was, after Christmas, we just moved the project into class. They're exactly the same, but in class. And then they took part, obviously, because they got no choice then, and to go from there. So I tried to record students' reactions, both in terms of things like body language and distractions, but also at a later date, we started to use Menti to see what they thought about the project and what they thought about the articles they were reading as well, which gave me some pointers on the kind of things that we could use in future. So, but it came to two main findings really, and the two main findings were about the students' confidence in their own abilities, which was, the confidence was higher than for a control group, and secondly, the students preferred texts that were familiar. So the first one, so compared to a control group, students had more confidence in their own English abilities. And, you know, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a statistician, but that's over 20% difference. That's students who thought they were extremely confident or somewhat confident in their own abilities. So, you know, I thought, I mean, just because there's a correlation doesn't mean there's causation there, but I thought that was a significant difference. That's a big chunk. So I thought that was interesting. And then secondly, when I spoke to them about whether the weekly read helped in their view, I got some decent feedback. So people said sort of positive things really, that they found that having this article really helped them. You know, being Scouse kids, that they're not exactly gushing with their praise. Did it help a bit, or a little bit? But there's, you know, it's definite sort of positive signs there. Not always. There's some negative things as well. One guy said it helped a bit, even if the stories were dead boring, which I thought was, I didn't know how to take that. And then, you know, there was a student who was particularly negative who, you know, just said, listen, I do loads of reading anyway, and this, you know, it was okay, but, you know, didn't really help. The other thing I thought, which was really interesting, which was something I wasn't really looking for, was students preferred texts that were familiar. And I thought familiar in two different ways. One, they seem to like text set in Liverpool, which I hadn't really thought of before. And secondly, they preferred modern texts that were relevant to the way they live. So I'll give you some examples. So there was a text about the life of a social media influencer, which, you know, wouldn't be something I was interested in, but the comments they said were that they felt it was relevant to them as young people. And, you know, someone used the expression more suitable for us. They found it informative and inspiring. You know, I don't know how I feel about that really. And then secondly, that wasn't really expecting. There was a text they used by the Guardian writer Grace Dent from her book Hungry, and people liked it simply because she talks about Liverpool, and there's just bits of Scouse language in it, and they really seem to pick up on that, which was, you know, I suppose I wasn't really expecting it from young people, but yeah, they were the two things I found out really, that students seem to be more confident in their own ability, and then they really seem to engage with something. If there was a hook, there was a way in really, and that's it. Yeah. So
another point, Alan, I was just going to add there, Alan, one of the interesting points one of several you raise and explore in your report is that I think you found it useful to offer them Menti as an opportunity to give you some anonymous feedback.
Yeah.
Which made a difference, I think, because you felt, well, why do you think that worked more effectively?
Well, I felt that when I was initially asking them for the feedback, I did feel that they were kind of telling me what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So they would say, "Oh yeah, it was interesting. It was all right. Yeah."
Yeah.
They're trying to sort of please me, really. There'll be a couple of
Quite some other comments on here.
Yeah, a couple of the students would have said it was awful anyway, because, you know, it's just going the other direction, really. But Menti let them say, you know, let them just be honest, really. It was interesting to compare the two different things as well. What they'd said to me and then what they said on Menti was not necessarily the same thing.
Alan, just a really quick question. So we've been asked, Sue Southwood, my colleague, has asked whether the students were involved in choosing the text, which you have, of course, touched on. They were, weren't they? And we both felt that the more involvement they had in their choice of text, like you've said, it really did make a difference. But I think the other thing that's important to just very briefly touch on was the fact that there was some text that students were triggered by, weren't there? And I think it was a trial and error process. Yes, you know, it's picking stuff that they can engage with and understand, but also being mindful of backgrounds and the type of things that are out there. Thank you, Sue. Sue's also put some links in. Where can you access, sorry, Alan, before we come back to you, where can you access the reports? Everything will be Bob, Lynn sent out to you. Everything's going to be put online, and recording.
I'll just add there, Helen. I think that's a really good question. I couldn't see who just put it actually, but Louise, yeah, thanks for that, Louise, because Claire did mention it just before we went into these workshop sessions. They are available on the Excellence Gateway, but I'll prompt Claire to mention that again, because I think it is useful if you've heard someone talk to be able to click and then read a little bit more about what they're doing. Thanks for that, Louise.
Yeah. But these presentations just bring everything to life, don't they? And that's the lovely thing. They contextualize the reports. Thank you, Alan, so much. I think that the lovely thing about Alan's report and Alan's research is what's been achieved, but also what he learned along the way, and his positivity and his perseverance. And I hope that you found that to be useful. So thank you very much. And thank you all three of the providers, because you've given some fantastic reports. So that's amazing. Thank you. Right, I'm going to hand to Bob.
Okay, Helen, that's so thanks Alan and Joe and Claire and all the colleagues that you brought with you. Hopefully, as Helen said, hearing the action researchers talk about their projects is whetted your appetite to kind of dig into the reports and have a look at not just the resources, which are really great, but actually some of the subtle insights into pedagogy that people have. Because sometimes it's only when you begin to reflect at the end of an action research project, you begin to realize how much you've learned. And so I've tried to highlight some of those insights.